rancher lived alone for years until the Bigfoot saved him from wolves. The old rancher had lived alone for years high in the frozen hills. One night, as the wind howled through the pines, he heard wolves closing in. He fired his rifle, but the pack kept coming hungry, relentless. Just when he thought it was over, a massive shadow burst from the trees. The creature they called Bigfoot fought the wolves with thunder in its roar. When the snow settled, silence filled the forest. The rancher knelt beside his unlikely savior, eyes wet with disbelief. He whispered softly, "I thought I'd die alone. But maybe I was never alone at all." In the Wild West, kindness can come from the wildest of hearts. The howl beneath the snow. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you listening from tonight? And when this story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now settle into a quiet place, breathe deep, and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into tonight's tale. The year was 1882 in the northern hills of Montana, where winter stayed longer than most men could bear. Snow had buried the fences, the barns, even the trails that led to the neighboring ranches miles away. And somewhere within that silent ocean of white lived a man named Sam Holt. Sam was a rancher, or what was left of one. 10 years had passed since the fever took his wife Mary, leaving behind nothing but a wedding ring and a quiet so deep it could hollow out a soul. He never remarried, never left the mountains. Some said he stayed because he couldn't let her go. Others said he simply didn't know how to live anywhere else. Each morning before the sun climbed over the frozen ridges, Sam would saddle his horse Dusty and ride through the pale mist. He spoke to the horse more than he ever spoke to men. "At least you still listen," he'd mumble with a faint smile, patting the animal's neck. His world was simple: mend the fences, count the cattle, light the fire. When the night fell, the wind would crawl through the pines and rattle the shutters of his cabin. To some it was just wind, but to Sam it sounded like the past whispering his name. He'd pour a tin cup of coffee, sit by the window, and watch the snow drift under the moonlight. The world was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. And yet in that stillness there was something watching. He could feel it, a presence in the woods beyond the creek, heavy but not hostile. At times he told himself it was just loneliness playing tricks on his mind. Then came that night, the one that changed everything. The storm had rolled in early, a curtain of white, swallowing the valley whole. Dusty neighed restlessly in the stable, and the cattle bawled somewhere beyond the ridge. And then through the moan of the wind came the howl, long, low, and sorrowful. One wolf at first, then many, their voices tangled in the dark, echoing through the pines like the sound of something ancient and hungry. Sam reached for his old rifle, the same one he'd carried since his cavalry days. He opened the cabin door, and the wind slapped him in the face, sharp as glass. The lantern flame shook wildly in his hand, painting the snow in gold and shadow. Each breath turned to frost before his lips. He stepped out into the storm, muttering to himself, "Guess it's just you and me again, Dusty." The horse whinnied softly from the stable, as if begging him to stay inside. But Sam was stubborn, the kind of man who'd rather face the dark than hide from it. He trudged across the frozen yard, his boots crunching through the crusted snow. The wolves were close now, too close. He could hear their feet padding through the drifts, circling. A growl cut through the night, deep and guttural. Sam raised his rifle toward the tree line. Nothing moved, until the light flickered, and for a heartbeat he saw it, a towering shape, half hidden behind the pines, taller than any man, broader than any bear. The hair along Sam's neck bristled, his breath caught in his throat. He whispered, barely audible, "Lord, help me." "What in God's name is that?" Before he could take another step, the wolves began to close in. The first pair of eyes gleamed from the shadows, cold and unblinking. Sam cocked the rifle, finger trembling on the trigger. The snow swirled like ghosts around him, and the storm howled louder as if the mountain itself was alive. And then through that blizzard of sound and fear, the old rancher's voice broke softly. I used to think dying in silence wouldn't matter. Until that night. Somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern's glow, the giant shadow moved again. A single step, heavy, deliberate. The wolves went silent. The air seemed to stop. And in that frozen heartbeat, the legend of the Bigfoot stepped out from the trees, changing the life of a lonely rancher forever. Part 1. Sam Holt, the man of the snowy hills. The mornings came cold and quiet in the high country, the kind of cold that bit through wool and leather, that filled your lungs with ice and silence. Sam Holt had grown used to that silence. He'd learned to live with it the way a man learns to live with a scar, by pretending it's no longer there. Before the sun broke the ridge, he was already awake. The old iron stove creaked as he fed it with pine logs, the flames licking slow and orange. He filled the kettle, the same dented one he'd carried since his cavalry days, and waited for the first hiss of boiling water. Outside, the world was still blue, that faint color that comes before dawn when the snow glows but the sky has yet to wake. He poured the coffee into a tin cup, black and bitter, and stepped onto the porch. From there he could see his land stretching out in white waves. Fences half buried the barn roof, heavy with snow smoke curling from the chimney like a ribbon of gray. Somewhere out in the pasture the cattle moved slow and patient, their breath fogging in the cold. Sam took a sip, grimaced at the taste, and muttered, "Ain't much of a breakfast, but it'll do." He turned toward the stable where his horse Dusty was already stomping and snorting, eager for company. Dusty was a strong buckskin mare with a white blaze down her nose and eyes as gentle as the first thaw of spring. Sam patted her neck, brushing off the frost that had gathered overnight. "Morning, girl," he said softly. "At least you still listen." It was a small thing, talking to a horse, but it kept his voice from rusting in his throat. Most days it was the only voice he heard. He saddled Dusty and rode out the leather creaking beneath him. The snow was deep, and every hoofstep landed with a muffled crunch. The world was nothing but white and silence except for the slow rhythm of Dusty's breathing and the distant call of a hawk circling somewhere unseen. By midday he'd mended 2 sections of fence and checked the stream for ice jams. Routine, that was how he kept the days from swallowing him. Fix the fence, feed the cattle, chop the wood, repeat until dark. He didn't count days anymore, only winters. This one was his 11th alone. Back at the cabin, the air inside was thick with the smell of pine smoke and dust. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a faded photograph, the only picture he owned. It showed a young man and woman standing in front of a half-built cabin. The man had the same square jaw, the same hard eyes. The woman's smile was soft, her hair pinned neatly beneath a bonnet. Her name had been Mary Holt, and she had been gone for 10 years. The fever had taken her fast. One day she was baking bread, humming a hymn under her breath. The next she was burning up with heat, her skin pale as snow. By the time Sam rode for the doctor, it was too late. He buried her behind the barn under a pine tree that still leaned against the wind. Since then, the house had stayed exactly as she left it. Her apron still hung by the stove. Her Bible still lay open on the table, the pages curled at the edges. Some nights when the wind was right, Sam could swear he smelled her bread baking again. Other nights he only smelled the loneliness. He stopped going into town not long after she died. People meant well, they brought food, said kind words, but every conversation ended the same way, a hand on his shoulder, a look of pity, and a silence that stretched too long. He couldn't stand it, so he stopped going. The mountains were simpler. They didn't ask questions. They didn't feel sorry for him. Still, sometimes when the nights grew too quiet, he'd find himself talking to Mary, as if she were still there. He'd sit by the fire, stare into the flames, and whisper, You'd hate to see what I've turned into, Mary. Just an old fool talking to a horse and ghosts. The crackle of the fire would answer him soft and steady, and for a moment, that was enough. It was late January when the first strange thing happened. Sam was out hunting rabbit, mostly sometimes elk, following a trail that cut along the creek at the edge of his property. The snow there was untouched, smooth as flour, but halfway up the bank something caught his eye. Footprints, huge ones. He crouched down, brushing away the drift with his glove. The print was twice the size of his boot, sunk deep into the snow, each toe clear as day. He stared at it for a long time, then looked around. No sign of a bear, no broken branches, no claw marks on the trees. Just that one line of prints leading upstream into the woods. Could be a trick of the thaw, he murmured, though he didn't believe it. He followed them for a while, maybe half a mile, before the wind picked up and the trail disappeared beneath fresh powder. By the time he turned back, the light was fading and the forest had grown quiet in that strange, heavy way, like the air before a storm. When he reached home, the print was still on his mind. He poured himself a drink, cheap whiskey, the only thing that still warmed him, and tried to laugh it off. "Bears get big up here," he told Dusty. "Real big." The horse just blinked at him through the stall bars, unconvinced. That night the wind rose hard from the west, rattling the windows. Sam lay awake on his cot, listening to the creaks and sighs of the cabin. Then he heard it faint at first, almost lost in the howl of the storm. Footsteps, slow, heavy, measured. They circled the cabin once. He could hear the snow crunch under each step. Then silence. Sam sat up, heart pounding. He reached for the rifle that leaned against the wall. Nothing moved. He waited, holding his breath. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The storm finally began to fade, leaving only the occasional groan of the timbers. When dawn came, he stepped outside. The world was freshly blanketed, the snow smooth and unbroken. If there had been tracks, they were gone now, erased by the night. Still, he felt eyes on him from somewhere deep among the trees. "You're getting jumpy, old man," he muttered. "Too much whiskey, not enough sleep." He tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered all day, that strange sense of being watched. Even Dusty seemed uneasy, her ears twitching at every sound. Once, while chopping wood, Sam caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the forest, tall, dark, and gone before he could blink. He lowered the axe, squinting into the trees, but saw nothing except snow falling through the branches. By sunset, the temperature had dropped again. He brought the cattle close to the barn and lit a lantern by the door. The orange glow flickered across the snow like a heartbeat. He told himself the prints were a bear's, the footsteps. A dream, the shadow, a trick of the light. But deep down, he knew better. Something was out there. Something big, and it wasn't afraid of him. That night, as he sat by the fire with a cup of coffee gone cold, the wind rose again. It moaned through the pines like a voice low and mournful, carrying across the valley. Sam stared into the flames, trying not to listen, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it filled the cabin. A howl, long and hollow, not one wolf but many, their voices tangled together, climbing into the sky until the air itself seemed to tremble. Sam stood slowly, every muscle tight. He walked to the door, opened it, and looked out into the white night. The moon was full, floating pale above the hills. The world looked frozen in silver light. He could see the ridgeline beyond the barn, and for just a second he thought he saw something move. A shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, gone as quickly as it appeared. The wolves howled again, echoing across the valley, a warning and a promise all at once. Sam whispered into the cold, "Mary, if you're watching, keep me in your prayers tonight." The wind carried his words away. Somewhere in the distance, another howl answered, deeper this time, almost human. The sound made the hair on his arms rise. It wasn't the cry of a wolf. It was something else, something older, something that had been waiting in those snowy hills far longer than he had. He closed the door, bolted it tight, and sat back down by the fire. Outside, the night groaned and shifted alive with unseen movement, and as the flames danced across the walls, the old rancher felt the first stirrings of a fear he hadn't known in years, a fear that something was watching, waiting, and slowly drawing closer. The howl came once more, softer this time, almost like a whisper through the pines, the sound of the wild warning him that his solitude was about to end. Part 2. The night of the wolves' morning came gray and still, the kind of morning where even the sun seemed hesitant to rise. The valley was quiet, too quiet, and that silence was the first thing that set Sam Holt's nerves on edge. He saddled Dusty before dawn as usual. The snow had hardened overnight crisp under her hooves. The sky glowed faintly pink behind the ridges, promising another bitter day. Sam adjusted his scarf, feeling the cold bite into his beard. Something was wrong. He could feel it before he saw it. The cattle were uneasy. Their low, restless moos drifted across the pasture. Dusty's ears twitched back and forth. She snorted, pawing at the ground. Sam frowned. "Easy, girl," he whispered, patting her neck. "Ain't nothing out there," but he didn't believe it. He rode toward the tree line where the forest pressed close against the open field. The snow here was broken and churned patches of brown earth, exposed, streaked with blood. Then he saw it. One of his cows, what was left of it. The carcass lay half buried in snow, torn open at the flank. The ribs gleamed white under the morning light, the air still steaming faintly from where the body had frozen overnight. Sam's jaw tightened. Wolves. It had to be. He dismounted, crouching to study the tracks around the body. They were everywhere, paw prints overlapping deep and heavy. Too many for a lone hunter. He counted at least 6, maybe more, and the prints were large, bigger than he'd seen before. "Damn," he muttered. "Whole pack must have moved down from the ridge." He rose, slowly scanning the forest edge. The pines stood dark and still, their branches heavy with snow. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched crawled up his spine again, the same as the night before. He unshouldered his Winchester, checked the chamber, and started following the trail. The tracks led deeper into the woods, winding through narrow clearings and frozen streams. The air grew colder the farther he went, the trees taller and closer, swallowing the light. After half an hour, he found more blood, a drag mark leading down a slope towards the creek. He followed it, careful, every sense on edge. The woods had gone deathly quiet now. Even the birds were gone. Then, somewhere ahead, a low growl rippled through the trees. Sam froze. Dusty whinnied softly, tossing her head. He raised the rifle, squinting into the shadows. Another growl, closer this time. Then another behind him. They were circling. He turned slowly, his boots crunching in the snow. Green eyes flickered in the dark, 1 pair, then 2, then 6. The wolves stepped from the trees, silent but sure. Their fur was gray and matted, their ribs showing under the thick coats. Hunger burned in their gaze. Sam took a breath, steady but fast. "Easy now," he whispered, backing toward the open space near the creek. "Don't do nothing stupid." The leader, a massive brute with half a torn ear, lowered its head and growled deep. Dusty reared, screaming, pulling at the reins. Sam swung the rifle up, fired once the crack shattered the silence. Snow burst from a nearby trunk. The wolf yelped and darted aside. The rest lunged forward. Sam fired again, another shot, then another. 2 wolves fell. The others scattered, circling wider. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the sharp scent of blood and snow. Dusty kicked free, tearing the reins from Sam's grip, bolting back toward the ranch in a flurry of white. Dusty, damn it! He turned just as one wolf leapt at him from the side. He twisted, firing mid-turn. The shot went wide. The animal slammed into his shoulder teeth, snapping inches from his face. Sam stumbled backward, crashing into the snow, his hat flying off. He shoved the rifle up, fired again. The flash lit the night like lightning. The wolf fell limp across his boots. Breathing hard, Sam tried to chamber another round, but the lever jammed. Frozen metal. He cursed under his breath, pulling back hard, but the mechanism stuck fast. The growls surrounded him again, low and constant, circling in the darkness. The leader stepped forward, eyes burning green, mouth open, breath steaming. Sam backed up until his shoulders hit a tree. He raised the rifle like a club. "Come on then," he muttered through gritted teeth. "You'll have to earn it." The wolves fanned out, moving slow. He could hear their claws scraping ice. He swung once, catching one across the muzzle. It yelped, stumbled, then regrouped. Another darted in, teeth snapping at his leg. He kicked it back, slipped on the snow, and fell to one knee. He could feel the panic rising, the wild animal kind that comes when you know there's nowhere left to run. His breath came in white bursts. The wolves crouched, low, muscles tensing. The leader moved first. It leapt, a blur of gray and teeth, straight for his throat. And then from somewhere behind them, the forest roared. It wasn't a gun, it wasn't a man. It was a sound deep and thunderous, like the earth itself had split. A growl that shook the air, sending a rush of snow from the branches overhead. The wolves froze mid-step. Even Sam stopped breathing. Another roar, closer, stronger. Then the trees exploded. A figure burst through the pines, massive, dark, moving with impossible speed. Snow flew in all directions as the thing hit the ground, sending two wolves tumbling. The others scattered, whining, tails tucked but not far enough. Sam stared in disbelief. The creature stood upright, taller than any man, broader than a horse's chest. Its fur was thick and dark brown, glinting under the moonlight. For a heartbeat, its eyes met his, not the red or yellow he'd imagined from legends, but a deep, steady brown. Then it turned on the wolves. The pack regrouped, snarling. One lunged. The creature caught it midair, flinging it aside like a rag doll. Another tried to bite its leg. The creature kicked, and Sam heard bones crack like dry twigs. It moved with raw strength, but there was control in it, not wild rage, but something deliberate, purposeful. Sam crawled backward, half hidden behind a fallen log, watching in shock as the impossible unfolded. He could hardly breathe. Every muscle screamed to run, but he couldn't move. He just watched. The snowstorm had started again, flakes swirling through the clearing, half blinding him. Through it, he saw the shadow of the creature, standing tall among the wolves. It let out one more roar, loud and echoing across the valley. The sound wasn't just anger, it carried pain, warning power. The wolves broke. They turned tail, vanishing into the forest one by one, their howls fading into the distance. And then, just as quickly as it came, the silence returned. Sam stayed where he was, panting, his rifle useless in his hand. The creature stood still in the snow chest, rising and falling. Steam drifted from its fur. For a moment it looked almost human. Shoulders broad, posture weary, eyes tired. Sam tried to speak. His lips moved, but no words came out. He swallowed, tried again, voice rough. What in God's name are you?" The creature turned toward him. Its eyes, those steady brown eyes, softened just for a moment. Then it took a step closer. Sam flinched, pulling the trigger on instinct. Click. The gun jammed again. The creature paused as if understanding. It tilted its head, watching him, then let out a low, almost mournful sound. Not a growl, something like a sigh. Snow kept falling, covering the blood, the tracks, the bodies. The wind had gone still. The world seemed to hold its breath. Sam tried to stand, but his leg gave out beneath him. Pain shot up through his side. The wolf had grazed him worse than he realized. The rifle slipped from his hand, landing in the snow. He blinked, vision blurring. The cold was getting deeper now, crawling up his arms like ice water. The last thing he saw before the darkness came was that face, that impossible gentle face, looking down at him. The creature reached out one massive hand, not to strike, but to steady him. For a moment, Sam thought he saw something like concern in its eyes, a kindness he hadn't seen in years. The snow fell thicker. The edges of the world began to fade. Sam's breath slowed. He tried to speak again, to say something, thank you maybe, but his lips wouldn't move. Everything went white. And in that final flicker of consciousness, as the storm swallowed the forest whole, he saw those eyes once more, warm brown and alive against the endless cold. Then, nothing. Just snow and silence. Part 3. The Creature by the Fire. The first thing Sam Holt felt was warmth. Soft and steady, not the cruel burn of fever or the fleeting sting of whiskey, but the kind of warmth that seeps slow into bone and memory. He tried to move, but pain rushed up his side, sharp as lightning. He groaned, a low, broken sound that startled even himself. When he opened his eyes, the world was still white, but different. The wind was gone. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, melting as they met the light of a fire that crackled nearby. He blinked, trying to understand. His coat was gone, replaced by a rough pelt draped across his chest. His shoulder ached and burned where it had been bandaged, with something thick strips of hide tied neatly, almost carefully. Then he heard breathing, slow, deep, heavy. Not his own. Sam's hand twitched toward where his rifle should have been, but it wasn't there. Only snow logs and firelight. He turned his head slightly, and that's when he saw it. Across the fire, half shrouded in shadow, sat the creature. It was enormous shoulders like an ox, arms thick as tree trunks, covered in a coat of dark brown fur that caught the light like wet bark. Steam rose faintly from its skin, carrying a scent of pine and earth. Its posture wasn't that of an animal crouched to strike, but of something resting, thinking. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Sam stared, every muscle coiled tight. His mind screamed to run, to fight, to do something, but his body stayed still, frozen by awe more than fear. The creature's eyes lifted, meeting his. They were brown, not the glowing red of nightmares, not the sickly yellow of a beast. Brown, deep, calm, steady, with a hint of sadness that didn't belong to monsters. The fire popped, sending a spark into the air. The creature didn't flinch. It simply watched him, as if waiting for him to speak. Sam licked his dry lips, throat raw. His voice came out rough, a whisper scraped with disbelief. "You saved me." No response, just that gaze, heavy and patient. He tried again, coughing this time, his voice cracking. "Thank you." The creature tilted its head slightly, a small movement almost human, and then it nodded once. The gesture was simple, but it sent a chill through Sam's chest. That wasn't from the cold. He had no words for what he was seeing. He'd heard tales around the fire in mining camps, stories of wild men in the hills, of spirits that walked like men but belonged to the forest. He never believed a word of it, until now. The creature moved slow and deliberate, and Sam tensed again. It reached behind, rummaging through a small pile near the fire. For a moment Sam thought it might pull out bones, maybe the remains of the wolves. Maybe worse. Instead, it placed something on the snow in front of him. A fish roasted golden at the edges, its smell sharp and clean, and beside it a handful of dark berries, half frozen but fresh. Sam stared. The gesture was so gentle it almost broke him. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand, but no sound came out. The creature sat back down, cross-legged, the firelight flickering across its face. It looked tired, not dangerous, not angry, just tired. The snow outside had stopped falling. The air was still heavy with pine smoke and the faint crackle of sap bursting in the fire. For the first time in years, Sam felt safe, and he didn't know what to do with that feeling. He reached for the fish hands, trembling slightly. The skin was crisp, the meat soft. He took a bite. Warmth spread through him, again this time, from the inside. "You cook better than I do," he muttered under his breath, not expecting an answer. To his surprise, the creature made a sound, a low rumble that wasn't quite a growl, almost like a chuckle. Sam blinked, unsure if he'd imagined it. He looked at the bandage on his shoulder, touched it lightly. The hide was tied with strips of sinew, the wound cleaned. Whatever this was, it had tended to him with care. The wind outside sighed softly through the trees, but in their small circle of firelight, the world felt removed from everything else, like they were sitting at the edge of time. Sam leaned back against a log, fatigue washing over him. The creature still watched him, silent, unmoving. He thought of Mary, of how she used to hum while she cooked, how her hands always smelled faintly of flour and pine sap. He remembered her voice the night before she died, whispering that he'd never truly be alone, not as long as he had kindness in his heart. He had forgotten those words, forgotten how to believe them, until now. He studied the creature again, the way the firelight flickered over its fur, painting it in shades of gold and amber. Its expression hadn't changed, still calm, still watchful, but those eyes, they held something familiar, something human. "What are you, Sam?" finally whispered. The creature's head turned slightly, as though it had heard the question but didn't know the answer. It looked down at the fire, then at him again, and gave another small nod, as if to say, "It doesn't matter." The logs crackled louder, breaking the stillness. A spark leapt into the air and landed near Sam's hand. He brushed it away absently, his mind turning circles. Every story he'd heard of the wilderness, every superstition whispered by hunters and miners came flooding back. But none of them matched this. None of them described kindness. For a while, neither of them spoke or moved. It was enough just to sit there, two creatures of the same wilderness, separated by mystery but bound by survival. The night deepened. The stars began to pierce the canopy above, tiny needles of silver light. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled again, far off now, almost sorrowful. The creature's head lifted slightly at the sound, ears twitching, but it didn't rise. Sam could see the muscles tighten under its fur, a memory maybe, or a warning. "They won't be back," Sam said quietly. "Not tonight." The creature looked at him again. This time Sam could almost feel something behind that gaze, recognition. He realized then how strange it was to speak so freely to something not quite human. But it felt right somehow, safer than he'd felt with any man in years. The fire burned low. Sam's eyelids grew heavy. The pain in his shoulder dulled under the warmth. The last thing he saw before drifting toward sleep was the creature turning its gaze toward the flames as if guarding him. When he woke again, dawn was breaking, a pale gold stretching over the snow. The fire had burned down to coals, thin tendrils of smoke curling into the morning air. The creature was gone. For a moment, panic jolted through him. He sat up too quickly, pain flaring down his arm. But then he saw it, a new pile of firewood stacked neatly beside the ashes, and fresh tracks leading toward the forest. Not wolf tracks, footprints, huge, deep, and sure. He stared after them, mouth dry, heart pounding. The memories of the night came rushing back, the roar, the firelight, those eyes. He should have been terrified, but all he felt was something softer. Gratitude, wonder. He followed the tracks for a short distance, just far enough to see where they disappeared into the trees. The morning sun caught on the snow, blinding bright. The world looked untouched again, peaceful, silent. He stood there for a long time, the cold creeping through his boots before turning back. Inside the clearing, he knelt beside the fire pit and pressed his palm to the warm ashes. He thought of Mary again, of her last words. He hadn't prayed in years, not since the day he buried her under the pine. But now something inside him stirred. He bowed his head and whispered, "Maybe you still hear me after all, Lord. Maybe you never stopped." The breeze moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke, the same as the night before. And for the first time in a decade, Sam Holt smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a quiet one, the kind that comes when a man realizes he's not as alone as he thought. Part 4. The Friendship of the Deep Woods. The days that followed passed in a rhythm so gentle that Sam Holt almost forgot what loneliness felt like. Every morning he woke to the same soft sound footsteps in the snow outside the cabin, heavy, deliberate, never threatening. Sometimes when he stepped out, he'd find small traces left behind, a half-split log stacked by the firewood pile, a fresh trout laid neatly beside the door, or a trail of enormous footprints leading back toward the woods. And sometimes when the fog lifted over the trees, he would see it, the creature watching from the ridge above, silent as stone. Sam had started calling him Ash after the color of his fur, gray-brown, like burnt timber after a long fire. It felt strange at first, giving a name to something out of a legend. But in those mountains, names meant respect, and respect was how men survived. Ash he'd call softly half to the wind. "That's what I'll call you if you don't mind." The creature never reacted, but Sam liked to think he understood. Winter hung on stubbornly that year. The snow never melted fully, only crusted harder underfoot. But Ash's presence changed everything. He appeared almost every day now, sometimes in the early morning fog, sometimes after sunset, when the cabin glowed warm against the dark. He never came too close, but close enough. If Sam chopped wood, Ash would carry the heavier logs, setting them down with careful precision. If the fences broke under ice, Ash would lift the rails, his huge hands steady as iron. And when the wolves began to circle again, their howls rolling through the valley at night, Ash's deep roar sent them scattering back into the timberline. For the first time in years, Sam slept without fear. They began to share small routines, quiet understandings that needed no words. At dawn, Sam would boil coffee, and Ash would sometimes appear near the edge of the clearing, squatting low, watching the steam curl from the tin mug. Sam would pour a second cup, place it on a stump, and walk away. By the time he came back, the cup would be empty, the snow around it marked by those same massive footprints. "Guess you like it strong," Sam would mutter with a grin. In return, Ash would leave things, small gifts of the forest. A handful of red berries, a smooth river stone shaped like a heart, once even a bundle of wildflowers pressed between leaves left quietly on Mary's grave. That last one broke Sam. He stood there for a long while, the wind tugging at his coat, eyes wet but smiling. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. "You somehow knew." He knelt by the grave, fingers brushing over the flowers. For years, that little mound of earth had been his quiet punishment, a reminder of everything he'd lost. But now, for the first time, it felt like something sacred again. At night, when the fire burned low and the world outside went silver with frost, Sam talked. He talked to Ash the way a man talks when the silence has lasted too long, like a dam breaking. He told him about Mary, about the way she used to sing while hanging laundry, about her laughter echoing through the canyon. He spoke of the war, the dust, the blood, the men he'd seen fall and never rise again. He confessed how some nights when the wind sounded too much like the cries of the wounded, he couldn't bear to close his eyes. Ash would sit quietly, never interrupting, never turning away. Sometimes his gaze drifted toward the fire. Other times he looked straight at Sam with that same calm, knowing sorrow in his eyes. And in those moments, Sam felt something he hadn't felt in years, understood. One morning the sky dawned pale and brittle. A thin mist rolled over the pasture and the air smelled of iron and pine. Sam was out repairing the fence when he heard a strange sound, a frantic cry, high and sharp, echoing from the direction of the frozen pond. He dropped the hammer and ran. When he reached the clearing, his heart sank. One of his calves had fallen through the ice, its small body thrashing in the black water, the hole widening with every desperate kick. "Easy, boy," Sam shouted, throwing off his coat. He took a step onto the ice. It cracked immediately. Damn it. He looked around, desperate for something, a branch, a rope, anything, but the pond was bare. And then the forest moved. Ash burst through the trees, snow flying from his shoulders in great white arcs. Before Sam could stop him, the creature strode onto the ice. Each footstep groaned, the cracks spreading, but he didn't hesitate. With one arm he reached down, catching the calf by the neck, lifting it from the freezing water like it weighed nothing at all. Then, just as the ice gave way beneath him, he flung the calf toward shore. Sam barely had time to grab it before Ash disappeared into the black water. Ash, Sam screamed. The calf bawled, scrambling to its feet. Sam dropped it, rushing back toward the edge, falling to his knees. He peered into the hole, the dark water swirling. For a heartbeat there was nothing, just silence and snow. Then a massive hand broke the surface, clawing for the edge. Sam lunged, grabbing hold. The cold burned through his gloves like fire. He pulled with everything he had, bracing his boots in the snow muscles, straining. "Come on, you big bastard, don't you quit on me now." With a final heave, Ash surged from the water, collapsing onto the bank, gasping in ragged breaths. Steam poured off him, fur slick and heavy with ice. He was bleeding, a long gash across his arm where the ice had torn him open. Sam stumbled back, panting. His hands shook, half from fear, half from cold. He grabbed his coat, threw it over Ash's shoulders. "You're gonna freeze to death out here," he muttered. "Come on, big fella. You saved my stock, let me save you." He didn't know if Ash understood the words, but the creature let him help. Together, man and legend, they limped back to the cabin, one step at a time, through the deep snow. For 3 days, the storm kept them trapped inside. Sam tended to Ash's wound as best he could, using clean strips of cloth and warm water. Ash barely moved, but his breathing stayed strong. At night, Sam kept the fire roaring, sitting nearby to make sure the bandages held. "Mary used to patch me up after bar fights," he said once with a soft laugh. "She'd call me stubborn. Reckon she was right." Ash blinked slowly, watching him, and Sam could swear the corners of the creature's mouth curved upward just a little. By the 4th morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the cracks in the shutters, scattering gold across the floor. Ash stood slow and steady, his wound half healed. Sam looked up from the hearth and smiled. "Guess you're tougher than both of us put together," he said. Ash reached toward him, palm open. For a moment Sam hesitated, then placed his rough, calloused hand against that enormous one. The touch was brief, careful, but it said everything words never could. After that, their friendship deepened into something unspoken and sacred. They worked side by side, fixing the barn roof, clearing the fallen pine that had blocked the trail, cutting logs for spring thaw. When Sam grew tired, Ash carried the weight without complaint. When Ash limped, Sam stayed close, guiding him across the ice. The woods that once felt empty now hummed with quiet life. Sam began to hum 2 old songs he hadn't sung since Mary. Sometimes Ash would tilt his head, listening as if remembering something long lost. Even Dusty seemed to accept him now. The horse no longer shied when Ash approached, only flicked her ears and watched curiously as he moved among the cattle. The wolves stayed away. Their howls had faded for weeks, replaced by the wind through the pines, low, peaceful, alive. Sam had stopped counting the days. He no longer thought of the years behind him or the winters ahead. Life had become a circle woodwork, warmth and the quiet comfort of company. And in that quiet, something inside him healed. He spoke to Mary less now, not because he'd forgotten her, but because he no longer needed to fill the silence. The silence itself had changed. It was no longer hollow, it was shared. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, painting the sky in amber and rose, Sam and Ash stood outside the cabin. The air smelled of pine and melting snow. Sam leaned on the fence, watching the last of the light fade. Ash stood nearby, his gaze turned toward the forest as if listening to something beyond the trees. "You ever think," Sam said softly, "maybe folks ain't so different from you? We all just want the same thing, a place to belong." Ash didn't answer. He just looked at Sam, eyes warm and still, and that was answer enough. They stayed like that for a long while, man and creature bathed in the last light of day. Then, just as the sun vanished completely, a sound rolled through the valley. A long, distant howl, not one, but many, threading through the trees like the memory of hunger. Ash straightened head, turning toward the forest. Sam's stomach sank. "They're back," he whispered. The air grew colder, the shadows longer. The wolves were moving again. Ash's shoulders tensed, the old fire flickering in his eyes. Sam reached for his rifle, heart thudding. The peace they'd built, fragile and beautiful, trembled on the edge of another storm. Part 5. The last stand. The storm came without warning. One moment the valley lay quiet under a pale sky. The next, the mountains swallowed the light whole. Wind screamed down from the ridges, twisting the snow into white serpents that slashed across the pasture. It was the kind of storm that made even the strongest men kneel and pray. Sam Holt had seen bad winters before, but never one like this. By late afternoon, the sun had vanished behind a wall of gray, and the air had turned heavy electric. He could feel it in his bones. Something was coming. Not just weather, something worse. Dusty paced restlessly in the barn, her hooves striking the boards in panic. The cattle bellowed, huddling against the wind that cut through every crack and seam. And from somewhere deep in the forest, beneath the roar of the gale, came another sound, low, distant, rising, a howl, then another, then dozens. The wolves were back, and this time they weren't alone. Sam checked the rifle again, his fingers stiff from the cold. He'd cleaned and loaded every weapon he owned, the old Winchester, the Colt revolver, even Mary's shotgun, the one that had gathered dust on the wall for 10 years. The lantern swung above the doorway, throwing wild shadows across the snow. He knew they'd come soon. The storm gave them cover, and in this blinding white, a man could vanish without a sound. Ash had disappeared into the woods that morning following their scent. Sam hadn't seen him since. "Don't you go doing something stupid," he'd said when Ash left. But the creature had only looked back once, that same calm gaze, steady and certain before melting into the trees. Now, as night fell and the storm thickened, Sam prayed silently that his friend had found shelter, but deep down he knew better. Ash would never run from danger, not while Sam was still here. The first wolf came at dusk. It broke from the tree line like a shadow, uncoiling, teeth-bared eyes burning green through the snow. Sam fired once. The shot split the night the wolf dropped. Then the world erupted. From every side came shapes gray and black, flashing through the blizzard. Their growls blended with the wind, their bodies ghosts in the storm. Sam fired again and again, each recoil jolting through his frozen arms. Brass shells clinked into the snow, hissed, disappeared. He hit one, missed another. A third lunged, jaws catching his sleeve. He swung the butt of the rifle hard, felt bone crack beneath it. The wolf yelped, vanished into white. "Come on, then," he shouted, voice torn by the wind. "Come on, you devils." The wolves didn't stop. More came. Dozens, maybe more, a tide of hunger and rage sweeping toward the barn. Sam stumbled backward, reloading, slipping in the drifts. His shoulder burned with pain from the old wound. He fired until the hammer clicked on an empty chamber, then silence. He reached for the Colt, fumbling with numb fingers. The storm swallowed everything, sight, sound, sense. All he could hear now was the frantic beating of his own heart. A shadow lunged. He turned too late. Teeth sank into his arm. He screamed, kicked, fired, blind. The wolf fell away, but blood darkened his sleeve, the warmth fading fast in the cold. He staggered toward the barn, half crawling, half running. Dusty screamed inside, hooves pounding. The cattle bawled, terrified. The smell of blood hung thick in the air. He slammed the barn door shut just as another shape hit it from outside, claws scraping wood. "Not tonight," he gasped. "You ain't taking me tonight." He slumped against the door, breathing hard, pistol trembling in his grip. The wolves circled outside, their eyes glowing like lanterns through the cracks. He could hear them digging at the snow, snarling, waiting for the next move. Then a new sound. A roar, deep, thunderous, rising above the storm. Sam froze. He knew that voice. Ash burst from the darkness like a bolt of living fury. Through the haze of snow, Sam saw him, a colossal figure wreathed in wind and ice, charging straight into the pack. The wolves turned on him at once, leaping, clawing, snapping. Ash met them head on. His roar shook the valley. He swung an arm and sent one flying into the drifts. Another leapt for his throat. Ash caught it midair and hurled it against a tree so hard the trunk split. The night filled with chaos, snarls, roars, the crunch of snow and bone. Sam pushed the barn door open and stumbled out, pistol raised. The wind burned his eyes, but he fired anyway, adding his gunfire to the storm. One wolf fell, another circled behind Ash. Sam shouted a warning, but the wind stole his words. Ash turned too late, teeth sank into his leg. He bellowed in pain, spun and crushed the attacker beneath his weight. Blood sprayed across the snow, bright and terrible. Sam reloaded, fired again. Every flash of muzzle light carved the scene in fragments, Ash towering over the wolves' muscles, glistening with sweat and frost. Wolves darting, lunging, falling, the snow turning red beneath them both. "Hold on, Ash," Sam yelled. "Hold on." The storm howled louder, drowning his voice. The wind tore at his coat, stung his face raw. He fired until the pistol clicked empty. He dropped to his knees, breath coming in ragged bursts. He could barely see. Everything was white and spinning. But through it all, he could still hear the sound, Ash's roar, echoing like thunder across the valley. Then, silence. When the wind finally eased, Sam looked up. The snow had stopped falling. The storm had spent itself. All that remained was the wreckage, dark stains in the snow-twisted bodies, scattered like broken shadows. And in the center of it all, Ash stood barely. He swayed on his feet, blood matting his fur, steam rising from his wounds. His chest heaved with slow, heavy breaths. Sam pushed himself upright, stumbling toward him. "Ash," he whispered, "you did it. You saved us." Ash turned his eyes, dim but gentle. He took one step, then another, and fell to his knees. Sam caught him as best he could, his hands shaking as he reached for the creature's shoulder. The fur was wet, slick with blood, but still warm. "No, no, no. Stay with me, you hear?" Sam begged. "You ain't going like this." Ash exhaled a deep, rumbling breath that sounded almost like a sigh. His gaze met Sam's, and for the first time, Sam saw something more than strength in those eyes. Peace. Sam knelt beside him in the snow, tears freezing on his beard. He gripped that enormous hand, rough, scarred, yet somehow gentle. "You saved me," Sam whispered, voice trembling. "Even when I was too blind to see you weren't the monster." Ash blinked slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting in the faintest, almost human smile. Then with great effort he reached out and placed one huge hand against Sam's shoulder. A gesture of comfort or farewell. The wind stirred again, soft and mournful through the trees. Ash's chest rose once more, then stilled. Sam stayed there for a long time, kneeling beside him in the quiet snow, the world holding its breath. He didn't know how long he sat like that, minutes, hours, maybe longer. The storm had ended, but the silence felt heavier than ever. He wanted to shout, to curse, to thank him, but no words would come. Only a whisper escaped, carried by the cold. "You were the best of us, Ash. The very best." When dawn finally crept across the valley, the world had changed. The sky was clear blue and endless. The snow glittered like glass. Sam rose slowly, stiff and aching, and looked down at the body beside him. Ash lay still, half covered in frost, his fur shimmering silver in the morning light. But even as Sam watched, the wind picked up again, gentle this time, swirling loose snow across the clearing. Within moments, the drifts began to rise, covering Ash's form bit by bit, until he seemed to fade back into the earth itself. Sam's breath caught. It was as if the forest was taking him home. By the time the sun broke the ridge, there was nothing left but snow, smooth and untouched. Only the faint imprint of those enormous footprints led toward the trees, fading step by step until they disappeared completely. Sam stood there a long while, his shadow stretching across the white ground. He thought of all the years he'd spent alone, the silence, the grief, the fear, and how one impossible creature had walked out of the wild and reminded him what kindness looked like. He felt no bitterness now, only peace. He turned toward the cabin, the valley still and bright around him. Dusty neighed softly from the barn as if sensing the change. Sam smiled faintly. "He's gone, girl," he said quietly. But he ain't really gone. The wind shifted again, whispering through the pines, not a roar this time, not a howl, but something gentler, almost like a promise. Sam tilted his head, listening. For just a heartbeat, he thought he heard it, a low rumble deep in the woods, fading into distance. A sound like breath, like life. He looked down at the snow one last time. The footprints were gone now, buried under a fresh layer of white. "Rest easy, Ash," he whispered. "You earned it." Then he turned back toward the warmth of the cabin, the rising sun catching on his shoulders. Behind him the forest stood silent, endless, eternal. And if you listened close enough through the hush of the morning, you might have sworn the trees themselves were breathing, keeping the memory of a giant alive beneath the snow. The whisper of the pines, spring came slow to the Montana hills. At first it was only a change in the light, the way dawn lingered a little longer each morning, the way the snow began to pull away from the rocks and roots beneath it. Then came the drip of melting ice from the eaves, the smell of wet pine and the distant murmur of running water, where the streams had slept all winter. For the first time in months, Sam Holt could hear the earth breathing again. The valley that had once been buried in silence was now alive with sound birds calling from the treetops, the creak of thawing branches, the soft splash of the creek breaking free. The cattle wandered farther from the barn, now kicking through patches of new grass. Even Dusty, his old mare, seemed younger, trotting with her tail high, her coat catching the sun. Sam worked the land quietly, one task at a time. He repaired the fences, tilled the soil, and spread seed over the thawed pasture. His movements were slower than they used to be, but steady, every step measured, every breath patient. Some mornings, when the fog still hung low over the field, he would stop and look toward the tree line. The forest stood there as it always had, tall, ancient, unmoved. Yet something about it felt different now, lighter, kinder. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it, a presence, still watching, still near. Each morning before he ate, Sam prepared a small offering. A bit of bread, a strip of dried meat, sometimes an apple when the trading post wagon passed through. He'd place it on a flat rock at the edge of the woods, the same place where the snow first melted, where the ground stayed warm from the morning sun. It had started as a habit. Then it became something else, a ritual, quiet and sacred. He never saw who took the food. Sometimes the offering would stay there all day, only to vanish overnight. Sometimes he'd find the remains of fish scales or pine needles nearby, as if someone had left something in return. He never went looking for answers. Some things he'd learned were better left to the mystery. "You've done enough for me, friend," he'd murmur softly. "If you're still out there, I hope you're at peace." The wind would stir through the pines and answer a slow, deep sigh that sounded almost like breath. And every time Sam smiled, the days grew longer, the snow melted completely, the earth once white and empty turned green again. One morning after the rain had passed, Sam walked out to the clearing with a sack of seed slung over his shoulder. The air smelled of wet soil and wildflowers. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that felt endless. He set the sack down, wiped the sweat from his brow, and caught sight of something strange in the mud near the fence. A print. He froze. Kneeling, he brushed the dirt gently aside. It was deep, too deep for any man, and wide with 5 clear toes, and the faint ridges of skin pressed into the earth. The rain had washed it clean, but not away. It was fresh. Sam felt the breath catch in his chest. He looked up toward the trees, scanning the shadows. The forest was still, but the air felt alive. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he smiled, slowly, quietly, a smile that reached the lines of his tired eyes. "Well," he whispered, voice trembling with warmth, "I'll be damned. You're still watching, aren't you?" The wind rose gently through the pines, bending them in a slow, graceful wave. The sound that followed was soft, not quite a voice, not quite a sigh, but something in between, a whisper carried by the forest itself. Sam closed his eyes and listened. He thought of the night of the storm of blood and fire and snow. He thought of those brown eyes looking down at him, full of strength and sorrow. He thought of Mary, of her words so long ago, "You'll never truly be alone, Sam. Not if you still believe in kindness." And there, in that quiet spring morning, standing barefoot in the wet earth, he believed her. That evening Sam sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky burned gold and violet. A thin wisp of smoke drifted from the chimney, curling into the cooling air. Dusty grazed lazily near the fence the cattle lowed, somewhere beyond, and the sound of the creek mingled with the wind. It was peace, the kind that didn't need words. He took a slow sip, then looked toward the forest again. The light there was fading, the pines turning to silhouettes against the dusk. Somewhere in that darkness he imagined a figure, tall, broad, watching quietly, as it had always done. He didn't need to see it to know it was there. Some bonds he'd learned didn't end. They just changed form. "I used to think I'd die alone," he said softly, setting the cup down. "But maybe I never was alone at all." The words hung in the air for a moment, then disappeared into the wind. The forest answered with a low hum, the whisper of the pines swaying together, soft and endless. It wasn't the voice of a man, nor the cry of a beast, but something older than both, a sound that belonged to the wild and to the heart at once. And in that sound Sam heard gratitude and goodbye. He sat there long after the sun was gone, until the stars climbed high and the fireflies began to blink over the pasture. Then, with a deep breath, he stood, patted the wooden post beside him, and headed inside. Tomorrow there would be fences to mend grass, to cut coffee, to brew. Life would go on. But something in the world had shifted just enough to let hope in. Out here in the harsh lands of the West, kindness can come from the unlikeliest of places, and sometimes the wild itself remembers the ones who listen. The camera of the mind pulls back the cabin, a small flicker of light in a valley vast and quiet, the pines swaying gently beneath the moon. Somewhere beyond, in the shadow of the ridge, the faint echo of a distant roar rolls through the night, deep, soft, eternal. Then silence. Only the whisper of the forest remains. Message in the unforgiving West kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next Wild West story.